Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and this is my twice weekly live webcast. We've got a couple of people looked in, which is good to see. I know we get a lot more who watch it later on catch up, but welcome to all of you who do look in live. Always good to see live faces here. Christine's looked in. Morning, Christine. Well, what have I got for you in today's show? Well, it's 304. It's Wednesday, the 11th of January. It's a rather nice morning outside, actually, at the moment. It's sunny, no clouds in the sky to speak of. It's relatively mild. A fairly short show because I'm back live with the webcast later at 8 o'clock this evening. So what are we looking at? Well, a US rider who escaped pursuit was promptly tracked down when he posted the video of his escape to social media. A new record has been set by an Egyptian rider for the longest distance travelled in 30 days by an electric motorcycle. Kenya's bikers are being converted to electricity from internal combustion engines. We'll have a quick look at how that story is developing and how Africa is actually turning out to be a bit of a powerhouse for electric motorcycles. On the other hand, if you want to continue to ride your internal combustion engine, a synthetic fuel plant has been opened in Chile by Porsche, and that is starting to produce e-fuel on a sort of pilot level. And then finally, today's discussion point: was the GSXR 1000 doomed by the R&D costs of meeting Euro 5, or was it a commercial decision? We'll have a quick look at that. There was an article in an American website magazine, which I thought was quite interesting. I'm not sure the writer actually came to the right conclusion. We'll have a look at that anyway. So we also have Clive and Kevin looked in. So good to see you all. Right, okay, so before we go any further though, if you haven't already, do consider signing up for tonight's live webcast. It's the annual, or the monthly I should say, talk show series. It's January's discussion. This one is about armchair riding, what I call armchair riding, how we can use visualization and other tricks from sports psychology to actually improve our riding without actually going anywhere near a motorcycle. As we're in the middle of the Northern Hemisphere winter, we probably won't be out on the bike quite as often as we would be when the weather's warmer. So it is a good time to consider how we can improve our brain. It's a much underlooked part of riding. We tend to focus heavily on the sort of physical skills of actually managing the bike, the inputs of changing speed and direction, and we focus on where and when to do that on the road in terms of positioning, speed, that kind of thing. But we very rarely in sort of road riding actually ever give the brain a thought, how the brain it is that actually allows us to make the right decisions. So if you are interested in that, do pop along. The link to sign up for that has gone up in the comments. It's in the preamble to the show too. Kevin says you signed up for this evening's live event. Yes, looking forward to seeing you there, Kevin, and I hope you find it interesting. It's £5. All the sort of cash that comes in for these things helps to keep funding my research into the science of riding bikes generally, and specifically the Science of Being Seen project. And in fact, the next Science of Being Seen talk in February, 1st February, will be on day riding nights. It'll be an in-depth look at the research, what's likely to be effective, and why they may not have been quite as useful as people tend to believe. So have a look at those. That's all the details of those two shows. So tonight it's the Science of Being Seen, Sports Psychology, 8 p.m. this evening. You can sign up to that till 6 p.m. tonight, or February's look at for the Science of Being Seen there, and that more detailed look at day riding lights. So yes, all right, so thank you very much if you have signed up, and hopefully some more people will sign up during the course of the day before 6 p.m. Don't forget, you can always get them on catch up for several days later. And Richard's looks in. Good morning, Richard. Excuse me. Now, On to the first story then. Now, getting into a situation where you are being chased by the police is always pretty dumb. I mean, it does happen, I will admit. That people do something silly and then the police come after them, but attempting to escape by engaging in a high-speed chase is even dumber and rarely ends well for the rider. But frankly, if you actually then manage to evade the police, but then go and post the clip of you doing that on social media, that really has to be the height of stupidity. Now, that's exactly what happened in the USA. The motorcyclist, who's not been named, managed to evade Georgia state troopers who were giving chase through Henry and Clayton counties. But having got away from them, he had recorded the pursuit, or at least his forward view as he got away from them, on video. He then went ahead and posted the recording on TikTok and YouTube. Now, police from the Clayton County Police Department, they actually searched social media and they were actually able to locate the video on TikTok and YouTube, and they suspected it was the one that was recorded by the suspect. Now, it didn't help the said rider that he was riding a highly identifiable bike. It's a 2022 Triumph Street Triple RS. Now, they simply went to the vehicle registration records and they revealed that there was only one such bike in the local area. And that, of course, also disclosed the driver's identity and address without them having to go to the trouble of approaching TikTok and YouTube to disclose the private details of the account holders. So, not surprisingly, officers from the Clayton County Police Department went to the suspect's home in Riverdale, which is approximately 15 miles from Atlanta, to interview him, and they wanted to see the bike. And as soon as they did that, the man confessed that he was in fact the person who had fled from the Georgia State Patrol troopers. He was issued with no less than 12 arrest warrants and taken into custody. As Clive says, what a plonker. And Barthel Mack has looked in as well. Good morning to you. Okay, so on to my second story of the morning. How far can you ride on an electric motorcycle? Now, if you're to believe some skeptics, the answer is not much further than the end of your own drive. And of course, many electric bikes do not have particularly long ranges. But, excuse me. I'll try and clear my throat. But the record distance to be covered on an e-bike in 30 days has just been set by an Egyptian rider called Ali Abdo. And he covered, wait for this, no less than 12,749 kilometers within 30 days and broke the previous Guinness World Record for the distance. In miles, that's 7,922 miles in 30 days. That is a pretty astonishing distance, frankly. Now, he began this ride. It was called the Ride to COP27 from Cairo. And before he ended in Sharm el-Sheikh, he'd actually passed through all the governorates in Egypt. And he was doing this to raise youth awareness of climate change whilst Egypt was hosting the 27th Climate Conference. Now, the trip ran from October the 10th to November the 8th, and he visited schools, universities, and sports clubs along the way. The journey was filmed to show the opportunities, the challenges, and the success stories that are associated with climate change. Abdo said the journey was a significant challenge, and he and his team had been preparing for this for a year. Now, you're probably wondering what bike he used to undertake this journey, and this is it. It's the Energica SS, spelt ESSE 9 Plus. That's an Italian-made machine. It weighs in at 260 kilograms, so it's not lightweight exactly. It has a power output of 80 kilowatts, and it produces around 200 newton meters of torque, and it gets a top speed of 125 miles per hour. So it's not a slow coach of a bike. It's actually a decent performing motorcycle. Now, Energica claim that this bike has the longest range of any electric motorcycles, and what they say the bike can do is 261 miles of city range, so that'll be toddling around at 20 odd miles per hour, 160 miles of combined city and highway range, and the extra urban riding they put at 130 miles, which is probably more realistic to what most people will actually get out of it. It comes equipped for Mode 2 or 3 slow charging, but also has built in a DC fast charge Mode 4. And that basically allows it to recharge at the rate of around 4 miles per minute. So the ride was actually sponsored by the Ministries of Youth and Sport, the Environment, Planning and Economic Development. In addition to getting some funding from the United Nations Development Programme, the US Agency for International Development, the Our Earth Climate Foundation for Sustainable Development, Abu Dhabi's Commercial Bank, Marrakesh and Pirelli, and the holding company for water and wastewater. So obviously he did get some serious backup there, but he also required a lot of volunteers apparently along the way. And while he was undertaking this mammoth journey, he also actually set a second record for the longest journey in one country on an electric motorcycle, which now stands at 9,749 kilometers. So he actually holds 4 records, which includes the record for the longest distance ever recorded on a motorbike, an electric motorbike, in 24 hours of 919.87 kilometers, which is 571.58 miles. So if anybody tells you again that you can't cover long distances on an electric bike, tell them to think again, and refer them to this item. I can think of a few riders I know of petrol engine bikes who'd struggle to clock 500 miles per day, me included, I have to say. Recently, back when I was a courier, it wasn't unknown for me to do 500 miles in a day, but I haven't done a distance like that for quite a while. Right, okay, you are watching Elevenses with Kevin Williams. Oh, that's the wrong banner. That was the one I meant to put up. Elevenses goes out Wednesdays and Sundays at 11, nearly always live, occasionally recorded, and very, very rarely I miss a show completely due to other commitments. Do set a reminder, try and pop along, and if you can't watch it live, do remember you can catch up. It goes out on Facebook, but it's easier to visit my YouTube channel, which is Survival Skills UK over there. Don't forget the all-important UK, or you won't find me. All the Elevenses shows are over there, as are my 60-second safety videos and other video content. So do set yourself a reminder and try to make the show on a regular basis. Now, next story. Now, back to electric motorcycles, I'm afraid. Sorry if you were hoping for some petrol engine stuff. But just as in the UK, motorcycles in Kenya are a cheaper and quicker way to get around than cars. But there is a but. Even when the bikes use less fuel to travel the same distance, the laxer emission regulations that have applied to older machines mean that they are more polluting. We have exactly the same problem here in the UK. And that is particularly a problem in the African nations, where many of the smaller bikes are elderly and are far from clean. So in recent months, brightly branded battery swapping stations have begun to appear in the capital Nairobi, where riders of electric motorcycles can exchange a discharged battery for a fully charged one. So what's all this about? Well, again, it's another attempt to switch riders from electric bikes to electric bikes from petrol engine bikes. And this is a photo here of what's the EcoBada factory. Now, right now, EcoBada have 50 test electric motorcycles on the road, but they already have assembled bikes which are ready to find new owners. And the price for these electric motorcycles is around $1,500 each. And the company plans to have at least 1,000 on the road by the end of this year. Now, the price, which is roughly the same as a combustion engine bike of the same kind of class and performance, is being kept low thanks to the exclusion of the battery from the cost. The ownership of the battery is said to be retained by the seller, so presumably it is leased. And as a result, they are not expensive to buy in the first place, but they are also cheaper to run than the petrol engine bikes they will be replacing. Now, one of the important considerations is that Kenya apparently has a very consistent power supply, which is about 95% renewable. Much of that comes from hydroelectric power. They also have a well-established electricity network, and this is being said to be a major factor in the ability to grow the electric motorcycle sector. The country's power utility estimates that it actually has sufficient capacity to charge 2 million electric motorcycles per day. That's obviously quite a few. Electricity access in the country is over 75%, which isn't bad, I guess, for an African country, according to the World Bank, and it's even higher in Nairobi. Now, naturally, there is some way to go to get all riders to switch their petrol engine bike. As I said, there are significant numbers. It's around 1 million motorcyclists on the road in Kenya, and many of them use their bikes commercially, but it is a sign that yet another African economy is starting to move towards zero emissions electric mobility. I mentioned Uganda recently in a previous show, and Tanzania also has a robust renewable heavy grid that could support electric mobility. Contrast that with the lack of rollout of charging points in the UK. Now, if you don't want to hand over your petrol engine bike just yet for an electric motorcycle, you may be reading articles in the press talking about the new plant that's being constructed in Chile by Porsche, which will be producing synthetic fuel for ICE engines. Well, it has now opened, apparently. Barbara Frankel, she's the member of the executive board for procurement at Porsche, said Porsche is committed to a double E path, e-mobility and e-fuels as complementary technology. Using e-fuels reduces CO2 emissions. Now, synthetic or e-fuels are made from water and sourcing carbon from waste plant materials, and they use renewable energy sources such as solar power or wind to power the recombination, as it were, of oxygen and carbon to make an e-fuel. Now, when you burn the fuel, you produce the CO2, which effectively you've taken out of the system by using those waste plant materials, and the idea is that the two offset each other. So the idea is that ICE engines running on synthetic fuel are carbon neutral. Michael Steiner, member for the executive board for development and research, he added the potential of e-fuels is huge. There's currently more than 1.3 billion vehicles with combustion engines worldwide. Many of these will be on the roads for decades to come, and e-fuels offer the owners of existing cars and motorcycles a nearly carbon neutral alternative. Now, you'll remember, of course, that Porsche actually is part of the same group that is owning Ducati, Volkswagen, Audi group. Now, the initial aim is to produce enough of the e-fuel to power special projects. They aim to use it for the Porsche Mobile 1 Super Cup and at Porsche Experience Centres. And that will require around 130,000 litres per year. But beyond this pilot phase, it's intended that the production of the plant will ramp up to a projected 55 million litres per year by 2025. Now, at the moment, the cost of synthetic fuel is several times that of oil-derived gasoline, and as petrol engine vehicles are scrapped, of course, there is another problem with these plans. Firstly, it has to be shipped from Chile to wherever it's going to be needed. Now, that, of course, is exactly the same as most oil imports, unless you happen to have oil in your own country. But here in Europe, the UK and the EU are both moving to zero tailpipe emissions. Now, since burning any fuel produces NOx pollutants, and that includes these e-fuels, it's not a zero emissions process. Now, while some owners will undoubtedly keep old ICE engined vehicles going, I suspect it's going to become an increasingly niche market unless some serious realignment in EU thinking on powering new vehicles in the very near future. So the idea that synthetic fuels could soon be cost effective does look unlikely to me, not least because if you want to keep something a bit special running, you're going to pay more for it, aren't you? So I think, frankly, that the e-fuel supply is unlikely ever to become a cheap fuel. I suspect it will be a limited availability fuel, and I suspect it will be at a premium price. So that's my thinking on that. Don't forget, I'm always interested in hearing your comments, and if you've got any questions about anything I talk about, I will try to get back to you. If I can't do it during the show, I will get back to you at the end of the show. Right, okay, on to today's final piece. So it's a bit of a short one today because I will be back online at 8 o'clock this evening with my live talk series presentation. But today's discussion point was about the GSX-R 1000 sports bike and why Suzuki have curtailed the line completely here in the UK and EU. Now, if you're to believe Kevin Cameron, he's an editor at the US magazine Cycle World, and he wrote in his article a swan song for the inline four superbike, well, sports bike actually. It's down to the bike's inability to meet the ramping up of emission standards with Euro 5. And in fact, that's absolutely correct. The previous model was discontinued because it only met Euro 4, and under the regulations, it had a dispensation to be sold up until the end of December last year. So as of January the 1st this year, no more GSX-R 1000. Now, the GSX-R range has a long history. There was actually a 400 GSX-R on sale in Japan, first of all, but it was getting on for 30 years ago at the Cologne Motorcycle Show that we saw the first of what really did become a pretty iconic lineage when you think about it. It was then in 1984 that we first saw that unique combination of the powerful oil-cooled inline four engine in a lightweight alloy frame, all wrapped up in the sort of bodywork which wouldn't have looked out of place on a twin headlight endurance racer. That was October 84. It looked unlike anything else basically that was on the road at that time. Now, as the model developed over the years, a surprising number of people, of course, actually bought one. I actually owned the 1992 WN model. That's the one in the picture with the what some people unkindly describe as the shell suit colours. Frankly, I rather liked it with the pink, but there we go. That was the first of the water-cooled machines, hence the W in the model designation. It had decent performance, though not in the GSX-R 1000R league, admittedly, but it was a 750 and it was also 30 odd years ago. One thing it did come with was the upside down forks and fully adjustable suspension, which was pretty much a unique feature of bikes at that point. The previous year's model, I think, was the first one with fully adjustable suspension. Nevertheless, I'll be honest, I never really gelled with that particular bike, certainly not to the point where I was sad to see it go when I did finally get rid of it. Although it was actually surprisingly comfortable for a race replica, I can honestly say that a lot of bikes designers should go and sit on one of those GSX-Rs and discover just how comfortable you can make a seat that looks like it's about a quarter of an inch thick. It was surprisingly comfortable, and I actually rode that machine almost 1,000 miles in under 24 hours back from Austria to the UK, and just when I got to the Channel ports, I just got off, had a bit of a stretch, and went and got a coffee. It was, it really was surprisingly comfortable. I've certainly ridden Tourers, which are way less comfortable than that bike. But I will say that the bike was a straight line barge. It was slow to turn in on bends, and I never ever sorted that out. At the same time, the allegedly stage 3 tuned engine on my second-hand bike made it very awkward to ride smoothly at lower speeds, and it was a real handful in the wet actually. And then the thing went berserk at silly speeds. So it wasn't the easiest machine to ride, and it also drank petrol like it was going out of fashion. So yes, it was fun, it was iconic, and it was a pain in the arse at the same time. Right, so anyway, Kevin Cameron, he points out that the Euro 5 emission standards, he gave us the figures, they cut the unburned hydrocarbons in the exhaust from 0.17 grams per kilometre to 0.1. Carbon monoxide had to go down from 1.14 grams per kilometre to 1.0. Nitrogen oxides, the NOx that are particularly nasty, went down from 0.09 grams per kilometre to 0.06. And a big chunk of his article then goes on to explain in considerable technical detail, it was quite interesting reading actually, how the GSXRs make their power and how the engine state of tune in the results in relatively high levels of emission escaping in the motorcycle's exhaust gases. And he says that in its current form, he couldn't, the Suzuki could not make it meet the lower emission levels. And he answers his own question, why not just do the R&D to make the GSXR 1000 meet Euro 5? And he says it's a simple cost benefit calculation. Quote, if big sports bikes were still selling in large numbers, income from their combined sales, their continued sale, might pay the R&D bill, but the present depressed state of powerful sports bikes makes it very unlikely that R&D dollars spent to make the GSXR 1000 meet Euro 5 would earn a profit. Better to discontinue the model and invest the R&D into new designs that have better sales prospects. Those new designs can be made to meet Euro 5 more easily and at lower cost. Designs such as those with fewer cylinders, smaller bores and longer strokes. So basically what he's pointing out there is the two new 800cc twins that Suzuki have dropped into their range. And if you think about it, Honda have also brought out the Hornet, and Yamaha have their MT-07 range as well. Now I would buy that, but for two things. There are in fact two variants of the GSXR motor which are Euro 5 compliant, and here's one of them. It's the GSXR S1000 GT. That's the fully fed tourer version. There is also a GSX S1000S naked. Now neither of these bikes are really short of power. They put out 152 PS, 106 Newton meters of torque. Now okay, that is getting on for 50 horsepower down on the R version, which is no longer available, but 150 horsepower is far from shabby. And on top of that, the second version is the detuned GSX S950, which has been specially built so that it can be reduced to the 35 kilowatt limit, which is the maximum you can ride on an A2 license. So there are versions of the engine still around. Now, as it happens, Honda's 2021 CBR 650R also received the engine tweaks that it needed to make it Euro 5 compliant, and all with no loss of top end power either. Now that bike still churns out 95 PS with a peak torque of 63 Newton meters at a not too revvy 9,500 RPM. So what's stopping Suzuki producing 150 horsepower GSXR? After all, they could ladle it with all the electronics, all the suspension upgrades, everything that you can dream of on a modern motorcycle. Well, it's probably as simple as the fact that buyers in the modern motorcycle market are tuned to each new model producing more, not less power. So much as a motorcycle with 150 horsepower motor and revised and lower gearing plus a retune for mid-range power would undoubtedly be nicer to ride on real roads, it's the top power figures that sell. And Suzuki almost certainly believed that a detuned machine wrapped up in the R bodywork would be a sales flop. And I have to admit that despite its looks, the CBR 650R has not been a particularly big seller. When it was introduced to replace the CBR 600RR, another bike that ran up against the emission limits, it was disparagingly described by someone I know as a hornet in a fancy frock. Well, you know what? As the owner of an O2 Hornet, I wouldn't complain. That probably makes it a perfectly fun bike to ride. Well, so that brings us to the end of today's broadcast. If you can make it along tonight to see the live webcast, that would be great. If you can't, well, hopefully you can make the next one in a month's time. But for the moment, if you're heading out there onto the roads today, it does look nice and sunny. Do stay shiny side up.